Week one is finally here, fellas. I had a couple tequila sodas watching the Packers and the Eagles game last night, but we are powering through to bring you guys the week one running back tier list where we go through all of my top 36 running backs, talking about their outlooks for this week of fantasy football. We're not going to waste any time. Let's start with some of the major injuries that we have to talk about here in the will they play tier. If you guys are new to the channel, basically we go through major injuries and then we go through the running backs tier by tier. The way I have the running backs ranked is, of course, the way that I would start them. So if you have any questions about who to start at running back, you can always just consult the way that I have these guys ranked here. So in the will they play tier, we don't actually have any major injuries to report. Aside from Christian McCaffrey dealing with a calf injury and Jaylen Warren coming back from his preseason hamstring pull, there isn't really anybody that is expected to be out. The wide receiver position is actually the one where all the injuries have happened this week. These three guys I will outline are all on PUP, so they will be out for the first 4 games of the year. Jonathan Brooks, Nick Chubb, and Kendre Miller. That is obviously upgrades to Chuba Hubbard, to Jerome Ford, and to Alvin Kamara. But a pretty clean bill of health to the running back position so far. Definitely won't last, as we know with the running back position. I'm sure we'll have some guys on this list as soon as next week. Now let's get into the top 12 running backs. I like to skim over the top 12 guys because you guys know that these are locked-in running back starts, hence why that is the name of the tier. But I do like to outline a couple of usage notes and a couple of things that I'm looking for. So all of these top guys are in your lineup as far as who could overperform and who could underperform. Some of these top 12 guys that have really good matchups this week include Christian McCaffrey. Saquon Barkley last night, of course, had a great matchup. Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, and Devon Achane. All of those guys have above average matchups in our matchup charts, which are available in our weekly rankings manifesto, which you can get down below in the description. Elite running backs who are in high-scoring game environments, the answer is pretty much every single one of them. All of these top 12 guys are in really, really good, positive game environments, lots of points expected. Outside of Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson, every single game for these top 12 running backs is over a 45-point over-under. So very, very high-scoring slate expected by Vegas right now. Elite running backs in bad matchups, on the other hand, we did have Jacobs last night, not in the greatest matchup in terms of the Eagles' defense. We saw them really stuff him a number of times. Isaiah Pacheco on Thursday wasn't a great matchup against the Ravens. Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne, and Breece Hall, all of these running backs have bottom 12 matchups just based on the defenses that they're going up against. But as I mentioned, Gibbs, Etienne, those type of guys, they're in really high-scoring game environments, even if the matchup itself isn't great. So I do like to highlight a guy or two from this tier, and I might as well talk about the guys that have already played because we actually have usage metrics on Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco, and Josh Jacobs. Saquon Barkley locked in at RB4 for me heading into the slate. 26 touches, 80% of the snaps, 66% of the routes, and 3 touchdowns. A monster 33.2 fantasy points in this Friday night football game in Brazil last night. The absolute stupidest narrative in all of fantasy football, in my opinion, was that Saquon wasn't going to get red zone work or he was going to get sniped on the goal line by Jalen Hurts. We saw that this coaching staff, this front office, was not going to pay a running back unless they were special, and DeAndre Swift absolutely was not special. Miles Sanders absolutely was not special. Saquon Barkley is, and he looked absolutely excellent last night. So great news for those of you guys that drafted Saquon and those of you guys that started Saquon, which I'm sure you all did if you drafted him. Isaiah Pacheco locked in as RB11 for me on Thursday Night Football. Did have absolutely great usage. If you look at his usage, 80% of the snaps, 79% of the rush attempts, 71% of the routes as well. That route participation rate and 11% target share is great news for Isaiah Pacheco. A lot of people were worried about Samaje Perine, and I was vastly on the Isaiah Pacheco will be just fine. He will be the workhorse here. So great news for him. He only had 15.8 PPR points, but like I said, it was a really bad matchup against the Ravens. He might find himself on the buy low list for me if his usage is going to keep up like this, because he will be a top 6 running back with this kind of usage on this offense. Josh Jacobs locked in for RB12 for me last night. 12.4 PPR points. Again, a very tough matchup against the Eagles. Defense there stuffed on 37.5% of his carries last night. Let's just cross our fingers that Jordan Love's ACL is intact, because that is the major concern for Josh Jacobs and pretty much every Green Bay Packers player right now and every Green Bay Packers fan, is that at the very end of that game, Jordan Love had, someone roll up on his leg, roll up on his knee. We don't exactly know what the injury is yet. Hopefully it's just like a high ankle sprain, or it's just a calf strain or an MCL sprain or something like that. But their fantasy doctors not ruling ruling out an ACL tear. So that would be really, really brutal for Jacobs and for the rest of the Packers team there. So let's move into the actual tier list. Again, we're going to go tier by tier, talk about 6 running backs at a time. And again, if I talk about a guy RB13 and I have a guy RB17, if you're deciding between those 2 running backs, I would, of course, start the player that I have ranked RB13. So my RB13 on the week is Joe Mixon. This Texans-Colts game, as I talked about in the Matchups That Matter video, which I do every Thursday, is a triple threat. And what a triple threat means is that it's a high over-under total, 49 points. The over is catching the steam, according to Vegas. 90% of the money is on the over right now. And it's a fast, up-tempo game environment. It is the second fastest combined pace of play between the 2 offenses that are playing. So that's what a triple threat is, if you guys hear me make that reference or that analogy this entire season. This game is expected to be fast and high scoring, so I want pieces of it any way I can get them. Joe Mixon is likely going to receive a big time share of the Texans backfield and has a very good chance to score a touchdown this week. So I really do believe that Joe Mixon could get out to a great start, and I am actually taking the higher on his 11.35 half PPR fantasy points over on Underdog Fantasy. Throughout this video, I'm going to be building out a Pickem entry too, which you guys can choose to tail or fade my advice as we go through. So running back 14 for me in my rankings is Rachaad White. White had an excellent workload last year, right? We're all kind of worried what his workload will be this year because they drafted Bucky Irving in the 4th round. Dave Canales moves on to a different team. How is Liam Cohen going to use him? I'm pretty confident that at least at the beginning of the season, I know my Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they don't like giving rookies big workloads or big roles at the beginning of the year. So I do think that Rachaad White is going to be just fine to start the season. The Commanders allowed the 4th most adjusted fantasy points to the running back position last year. So this is a really good matchup. White's a great start this week, and the Bucs are also implied for 23 points according to Vegas. So I feel pretty comfortable that even if he loses a little bit of work from last year, this matchup is very, very strong. So you want him in your lineup. RB15 locked in for me on Thursday Night Football. That was Derrick Henry. 10.6 PPR points, saved by a touchdown. He only averaged like 3.6 yards per carry. Looked noticeably a little bit slower, I would say, as well. And not to mention, it appears that Derrick Henry's workload is a lot more similar to 2023 Derrick Henry than 2020 to 2022 Derrick Henry. I actually thought we were going to get a very similar situation to 2020 to 2022 Derrick Henry, where he was going to get taken off the field on 3rd downs, long down and distance, 2-minute drill stuff for Justice Hill. But we actually saw him basically give up early down work to some degree as well. So only being a 50% snap share guy like he was with Tajay Spears last year in Tennessee caused him to be outside of the top 12 running backs in points per game. And if you have Derrick Henry, I would be pretty concerned. And this is why I wasn't drafting him. I had him ranked in like the 30s, mid 30s of my fantasy rankings because I thought this was a possibility. If he doesn't score, there's a very good chance he's not going to be a very good option. But it was a negative game script. The Ravens will probably be winning a lot of the time, so I still think he's probably a good bet for a touchdown any given week. But if he doesn't score, I think these are the types of games and the efficiency that you have to worry about. So RB16 for me in my rankings is Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. I guess my main focus with Kamara is that he was roughly like a 65% snap share guy last year, but he had a 19% target share. So he was actually ceding a little bit of work in terms of snap share and route participation and things of that nature to Jamal Williams, to Kendre Miller last year. Of course, Kendre is on IR, so we don't have to worry about him. But I do think that Jamal Williams could steal a little bit of work from Alvin Kamara. It is a 41.5 point over-under this week for the Saints and the Panthers, so not a high total. But the implied total for the Saints is 23 points. And according to the sharp bettors, it looks like they are on the over right now. 93% of the money is on that game going to the over. So I feel pretty good that Kamara can catch a couple passes, maybe get into the end zone. But I am generally curious to see what his workload looks like and if we still see that kind of high route participation, high target share guy that we've seen the last couple of years. Running back 17 for me in my rankings is Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. This backfield was a very clear, defined role situation last year. If you guys can see it on the screen there, Kenneth Walker was primarily the early down guy, primarily the short down and distance red zone guy. Zach Charbonnet ran most of the routes, caught most of the passes, and worked in the 2-minute drill and long down and distance situation. All of this data, by the way, is from fantasylife.com. Dwayne McFarland does excellent work over there, so make sure you go ahead and check that out. Not a sponsor, just plugging really good work here. They've talked about Kenneth Walker's pass catching usage, and it's an entirely new coaching staff, right? So we don't know for sure that they're going to use these guys in the same roles that they used them last year. It's possible that Charbonnet gets more work or Walker gets more work or whatever the case is. Based on the coach speak that we've heard from these guys, it appears that Walker is in line for more of an increased workload. I think he's going to be a good start this week. Seattle is implied for nearly 24 points according to Vegas. They're home favorites by 6 points, which is a great game script for Kenneth Walker and the type of role that he has there. And the Broncos are starting a rookie quarterback in his first NFL game. So I do think there's a very good chance that the Seahawks win this one, and it is a good rushing game script. And the Sharps actually like the over in that game too, with 89% of the cash on over of 41.5. David Montgomery closes out this tier for me. He is actually my start of the week, which of course I do one start of the week every single week here. Rams versus Lions is the highest point total on the slate. It is a 52.5 point over under. I believe it opened around 49 or 50. So the Sharps are just absolutely hammering the over on this game. And David Montgomery, in any kind of high scoring game environment, we know what his appeal is. The Lions are implied for 28.5 points. The over is catching 79% of the steam in this game. And even though the Rams defense was a top 7 unit against fantasy running backs, there is no more Aaron Donald. He retired, so that is going to be a big-time upgrade for David Montgomery. I think he is virtually a lock to score a touchdown, maybe 2 in this game. Knowing that he has that red zone role, or at least we think he'll have that red zone role to begin the season, David Montgomery has a very, very good chance to get into the end zone. It's going to be interesting to see how him and Jahmyr Gibbs' split changes from what it was last year, because last year was very clear, defined roles, but Jahmyr Gibbs is heading into year 2. Maybe David Montgomery's workload is diminished, but like I said, I feel like he's a pretty good bet to get into the end zone in this game. Low-end RB2s tier, we're going to talk about another guy who's a very good bet to get into the end zone with Raheem Mostert, who is my RB19 on the week. This game is the second highest total on the slate. So the Dolphins and Jaguars, 49.5 points. Dolphins implied for 26.5, which is second only to the Lions this week. The Jags were exactly league average against fantasy running backs last year. Teams generally tended to pass against Jacksonville last year. They only had the 7th lowest running back carries allowed. So I think that the Dolphins will probably be trying to air it out like they usually do. But again, similar to David Montgomery, with that high of a total, I think that Raheem Mostert's probably a decent bet to find the end zone, decent bet to be a top 20 running back this week. And again, we want to monitor what this workload split looks like between Devon Achane and between Raheem Mostert. But like I said, I do think he's a solid start this week. Good chance he finds the end zone. Running back 20 for me in my rankings is Aaron Jones, now of the Minnesota Vikings. This workload is a huge question mark. I feel like a lot of people look at Aaron Jones and just assume he's going to be a workhorse here, or potentially assume that he's going to be used exactly the way he was used in Green Bay. But it's a completely different team. It's a completely different coaching staff. Aaron Jones has pretty much played for Matt LaFleur his entire career. So it's going to be interesting to see how they rotate these backs. How do they split receiving work? How do they split routes? How do they split long down and distance 2-minute drill stuff? Is Aaron Jones the goal line back, which I think he probably will be? The Giants were a top 6 matchup for fantasy running backs last year, so I really do expect Aaron Jones to have an efficient game here. It's really all about how does Sam Darnold look. Is Sam Darnold going to be the type of quarterback that's going to check the ball down a ton? I think he will be. Aaron Jones is probably a good bet, in my opinion, to go higher than his 3.5 rushing plus receiving first downs, because we also know about Aaron Jones that anytime he's on the field, he's been a very efficient running back, even though he's a little bit older. Long term, I'm kind of worried about what his workload looks like in week 7, week 8, but early in the season, I feel like he's going to be a good bet to get out to a hot start and have a good, efficient workload early on in the season. So running back 21 for me is James Conner. All offseason with James Conner, people banged the drum that he was going to be really efficient. He was going to be the workload because of how he performed in Drew Petzig's offense last year when it was his first year in that offense. What does the split look like between James Conner and the pass-catching backs like DeMercado and some of those other guys? Is Trey Benson involved, or is this just James Conner 70% workload type of guy that some people expected? Again, I tend to think he's probably going to have a good workload at the beginning of the year. But the Bills defense was a top 10 unit against fantasy running backs in 2023. So it's not a great matchup for the Arizona Cardinals in the Buffalo Bills game, but the over-under on that game is pretty high as well. So feel pretty good about Conner this week. I would say there's probably a bit of a tier drop off here now to Ramondre Stevenson at RB22. Definitely going to be like a slugfest of a game. I'd say with Stevenson, he's probably going to get a majority workload, because last time we saw him on the field from like weeks 1 to 13 last year, he was a 65-70% feature back. But they added Antonio Gibson in the offseason. Does he take away a large share specifically of the routes, the long down and distance, and the 2-minute drill stuff? Because that is the thing that Ramondre Stevenson cannot afford to give away, because we don't expect this Patriots team to win a lot of games and to be in a lot of positive game scripts this season. So if he's not getting the long down and distance and 2-minute drill work, then Ramondre Stevenson's just going to be like a plodding, RB3 who you want to score a touchdown any given week. The Bengals allowed the 18th most adjusted fantasy points to the running back position. So it's a pretty good matchup, but the Patriots will probably struggle to move the football and probably struggle to move the chains in this game. So definitely keep an eye on that. Moving on to Javonte Williams, who is my RB23 on the week. As I talked about all offseason, Javonte Williams was top 15 running back in weighted opportunities in 2023. The Seahawks were a bottom 10 team in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position, but this is a very, very low scoring game with a 41.5 over under, and the Broncos specifically in this game are implied for the second lowest points at 17.75 of the entire week 1 slate. So the Broncos offense not expected to score a lot. I've been impressed with what I saw from Bo Nix in preseason games, but it's a little bit different when the bullets are flying in a regular season game. So the split will definitely be interesting in this Broncos backfield. We've talked about it a lot on this channel of Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime, but I'm expecting Javonte Williams probably to carve out a 65% opportunity share, Jaleel to carve out the obvious passing downs, long down and distance, and 2-minute drill stuff. RB24 for me in my rankings closing out this tier is DeAndre Swift. Good game script, good point total for the Bears, 24 implied points, 44.5 point over under in this game, and the Sharps actually on the over right now. I guess I just have no idea where to rank DeAndre Swift because of Khalil Herbert. If I knew that Swift was going to be a 70% feature back like his contract would dictate, then I would be totally fine just, throw him in my lineup, top 15, top 20 back each and every week. But despite the good matchup this week against the Titans, I really do think this could be a timeshare. I'm worried that Khalil Herbert is going to be a big part of this backfield, and not just because Khalil Herbert is good, but because Khalil Herbert might actually be better than Swift. So it's possible that as the season goes along, Swift loses some work here. But if he can get out to a great start, it's possible that those of you guys that drafted Swift could use him to tier up to a little bit of a safer running back option. But I believe in this offense. I think whoever the starting running back here is could end up having a great season. It's just the question mark is, do they have a starting running back, or are they going to rotate guys each and every week? Because I didn't even mention Roschon Johnson, who's a decent player as well. So those are kind of like your locked-in RB2s or better. Let's move into the flex plays tier. And again, you're probably not needing to dig deep at running back this week because there are no major injuries. Like McCaffrey and Warren, like I said, are the only two guys even coming into the game banged up. The running back position is very, very healthy right now. Running back 25 for me in my rankings is Jerome Ford. This coaching staff has been hyping up his workload, hyping up how good of an option he can be, especially with Deontay Foreman having that injury scare in training camp. I think Ford will have a decent workload in week 1. Is the third worst fantasy matchup for the running back position last year against the Cowboys, but this game is expected to be the fastest paced on the entire slate, and even though the Browns have a little bit of injuries on their offensive line, I feel good that Jerome Ford is a great start this week, and the Cowboys too, they have a new defensive coordinator, so it's possible that we could see some holes open up in the running game while they're trying to gel with Mike Zimmer early on in the year, so I wouldn't be scared of Jerome Ford this week. Again, he's outside my top 24, so if you have better options, don't start him, but if you're in need of a flex because you had T. Higgins and he's going to be out for this game, I think Jerome Ford could definitely, you could definitely do worse than Jerome Ford there. Running back 26 for me in my rankings is Najee Harris. Like I said, Jaylen Warren is coming into this game a little bit banged up. He had a hamstring injury in the preseason game. We know the split between Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren was last year. It was basically 50-50 across the board. Najee gets a little bit more early down work. Jaylen Warren gets more receiving work and gets more long down and distance work. I don't think Arthur Smith is going to mess with that. I know a lot of people hate Arthur Smith, but I think he's probably going to keep a relatively similar backfield split that we saw last year where, like I said, it was damn near 50-50. This team wants to run the football, and I guarantee that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are going to be fixtures of this like flex plays tier, maybe even higher, depending on how effective they are running the football because they improve their offensive line. Arthur Smith wants to run, and there's a very good chance that both of these guys can be, just like they were last year, like top 30 running backs. Like both of them finished as top 30 running backs in 2023 in points per game. So I feel pretty good about both of them, but Najee is my preferred option this week just because of the tiebreaker that Jaylen Warren is coming into this game banged up. RB27 for me is Zamir White. Definitely some disappointing preseason usage out of Zamir White, but I do think that the Raiders want to use him as a feature back. The Chargers were a bottom 3 defense against fantasy running backs last year. I think Jim Harbaugh is probably a better DC than Brandon Staley was, but it's basically the same personnel on that unit. So Zamir White, a decent start. He actually scored his only touchdown of the year against the Chargers last season, so very good chance he finds the end zone in this game. Devin Singletary, my RB28, again, mid-matchup against the Vikings. I think he's a fine flex play just if you need a good workload, a good volume play. That's kind of why you would have drafted Devin Singletary in the first place. 0 RB teams or hero RB teams needed a volume play. I guess the big question for me is, what does this Giants offense look like? Does Malik Neighbors rise the tide of this offense, or does Daniel Jones look terrible and this offense can't generate a first down? And also, too, I want to know what Tyrone Tracy's involvement is on third down and long down and distance situations, because if he's taking away that work for Singletary, again, similar to the Patriots backfield, I want the guy who's going to be on the field when they're down in games, because I don't think the Giants are going to be very good this year, so I need them to have, or I need Singletary to have that third down role. Chuba Hubbard, RB29 for me. Again, Jonathan Brooks is on PUP to start the year, so the first 4 games of the season, we're going to see Chuba Hubbard probably post solid usage like he did last year. He's a 60% snap share guy. Hopefully, Dave Canales feeds him the same type of workload, because I actually drafted this in one of my leagues where I took Jonathan Brooks, put him on my IR spot, and picked up Chuba Hubbard later on in the draft so that I could start Chuba Hubbard and then kind of ditch him once Jonathan Brooks comes back. And then running back 30, closing out this top 30 range for me, is Chase Brown. I would love to put him higher up on this list, but I just have absolutely no idea how this backfield is going to look. On top of that, too, this game is probably going to be kind of ho-hum. Like I said, it's the lowest over-under on the slate, the only one below 40, I believe. And with Higgins doubtful, with Chase coming in, potentially holding out for this game, I don't love what the Bengals offense is set up to do against a Patriots defense that's pretty good. So Chase Brown, not a great option this week. Again, if you could throw him into your lineup because you have no other options, it's definitely fine. Like, I'm starting him at RB2 in a hero RB build in my home league. But again, I probably don't want to start him. I just don't really have a better option at this point in time. And then finally, we're going to talk about some deep league flex plays. Again, you probably don't need to dig this deep at the running back position. Brian Robinson, bad matchup against the Buccaneers, but I will say, as a Bucs fan, Jaden Daniels could give us some problems as a rushing quarterback, and that could open up some lanes for Brian Robinson. Jaylen Warren is my RB32. Again, I would have him higher if he wasn't coming off of a hamstring injury. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, I'm a total coward, and I rank them back-to-back because I have no idea what this backfield split is going to look like. And on top of that, too, it could be a game script for Spears if the Bears get out to a big lead, and that might be bad for Pollard. But if it's a close game or it's an early good game script there, then Pollard appears to have a slight leg up in that role. So again, I don't really know where to rank these guys. I want more information on this backfield before I put these guys into my lineup. And then closing up my top 36, I have J.K. Dobbins and Rico Dowdle. Don't start these guys if you don't have to. I want to see what the Chargers backfield looks like before I put anybody out there. And same goes for the Cowboys backfield, because as much as I think Rico Dowdle is probably the guy that you want this week, I don't really know what it's going to look like yet. I don't know if Ezekiel Elliott's going to be the lead back or if Dowdle's going to be the lead back. Again, there's no reason to dig deep and dumpster dive at running back this week because there are no injuries at the running back position this week. So you should have 2 of my top 30-ish options to be able to put into your lineup. And like I said, as this video was going on, I showed you guys some of my favorite pickems this week. Raheem Mostert higher than 9.5 or 9.15 fantasy points, higher than 11.35 fantasy points on Mixon, higher than a total touchdown, half a total touchdown on David Montgomery, and then higher than rush plus receiving first downs, 3.5 for Aaron Jones. So if you want to tail my picks, you absolutely can. I will be putting this out over on our TikTok if you guys want to check us out over there. And also, too, this weekend, they have this Dak free pick over on Underdog Fantasy for new and returning users. So if you guys want to add that free square into the pick that I have, you could win up to 20 times your money there. And of course, too, when you sign up on Underdog, if you guys are not Underdog users yet, you can sign up on Underdog Fantasy. You get our weekly rankings manifesto for free. So in addition to my top 36 running backs that I just went through here, you'll get our wide receiver rankings, quarterback, tight end, all of the matchup chart information that I talked about, all the Vegas information that I made reference to is in there as well. It's the best tool that you can use to set your lineup all season long. And again, you get it for free when you sign up with just $10 on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Tail my picks, have some fun this year. Underdog is going crazy with these promos this season. They have a ton of free picks. They have a ton of deposit bonuses and profit bonuses. Everything is a ton of fun to play Pick'em over there. And again, to get your weekly rankings manifesto for free, emailed to your inbox within 24 hours when you sign up. Or if you already have an Underdog account, you, of course, can get our weekly rankings manifesto on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE when you sign up. Our weekly rankings manifesto is live on the post page right now, and you can get access to that with our promo code on Flock Fantasy. So if that interests you, check it all out. Link down below in the pinned comment. If you enjoyed this video, if I helped you set your lineup, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Comment any questions down below, and I'll try and answer as many as I can. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.